man Jacob Arminius. Some of you may have heard about the Arminian Calvinist controversy. Some may have even participated on debates and discussions and have insisted on a particular theological camp. However, there is a great possibility that the majority of Christians who concern themselves in distinguishing doctrinal stances between the two major brackets of evangelicalism have not truly understood their own position, or even so, the position held by their counterparts. Regardless how unwise that would be, today I will present to you briefly one of the most misrepresented and misunderstood godly man in Reformation history. Jacobus Arminius. Jacobus Hermani Harmenson, a Dutch name of which Jacob Arminius is a Latinized variant, was born in 1559 in the Dutch city of Oudwater. His mother, Angelica Harmensdochter, raised him and his siblings after their father, Harmen Jacobson, passed away in 1558, before they were born. In the Spanish slaughter at Oudwater in 1575, his family was massacred. Since his father had passed away, Arminius had been looked after by others and was no longer a resident, so he survived. Jacob entered the following year at Leiden's brand new university. There he began really engaging with the confessional theology of the Reformed Church in the Netherlands, as well as his academic and pastoral careers. He moved to Geneva in 1581 to continue his studies under Theodore Beza, Calvin's successor. He spent a year there studying before moving on to Basel, although he later came back to finish his studies in Geneva until 1586. Arminius started serving as a pastor in Amsterdam in 1587, and he was ordained the following year. He spent 7 months pursuing philosophy at the University of Padua before embarking on his pastorate while on a trip to Italy with a colleague. He claimed that the visit made the Roman Church more foul, ugly, and detestable in his eyes, yet the trip was cited by some of his later critics as evidence that he supported Rome. A claim with no real basis, since Jacob loyally affirmed and taught the Belgic Confession and the Heidelberg Catechism to his death. In 1590, he started getting involved in the theological debates around the same time Jacob got married to Lipsit Rayel, a council member's daughter. In one occasion, Jacob was requested to respond to Dirk Coornhert's criticisms of Calvinism during this year, as well as the complaints of two Delft ministers who had published an anti-Calvinist tract. Contrary to Protestant tradition, Karl Banks, who is lauded for his contemporary biography of Arminius, has demonstrated that there is no evidence that Jacob, despite being Reformed, ever held strict Calvinist views, did not convert from Calvinism to anti-Calvinism in his attempt to refute these anti-Calvinist teachings. In any case, he was involved in a debate over the strong Calvinist ideas of his time. A minister by the name of Petrus Plancius led an unfair assault against Jacob, inaccurately calling Arminius a Pelagian and alleging that he had rejected the Heidelberg Catechism and the Belgic Confession of Faith in favor of anti-Reformed notions of predestination and perfectionism. When Arminius said that his theology adhered to that of the Reformed Church and its confessional standards, the Heidelberg Catechism and Belgic Confession of Faith, the Amsterdam burgomasters agreed. Now, before we can move on, one must first comprehend the historical context of confessional theology in the Reformed Church in the Netherlands during Arminius' lifetime in order to recognize the impact of such events on our perspective of Arminius as a theologian. Due to ignorance of the historical background of the 16th century Dutch Reformation, the majority of interpretations of Arminius' theology are founded on erroneous assumptions about his life and surroundings. Like most of the Protestants of his day, Arminius was not predisposed to a supralapsarian view of predestination. he tended to hold the same opinions as many pastors and theologians who were Reformed before him. Both historically and theologically, the Reformed Church in the Netherlands has a varied history. According to Carl Banks, many within the Reformed churches responded badly when Calvin published his ideas on predestination in the 1540s. Hence, the gentler views of the Swiss cantons were apparent from the early beginnings of the advent of Reformed religion in the Low Countries. The pastor of the Reformed Church in Emden, Albert Hardenberg, had a significant impact on the early leaders of the Dutch Reformed churches, who openly opposed the spread of Genevan Calvinism in the Low Countries. Albert was more in line with Philip Melanchthon than with Calvin on the issue of predestination. The Heidelberg Catechism and the Belgic Confession of Faith were adopted during the Synod of Emden in 1571, and both forms of unity before the Synod of Dort deliberately left room for dissent regarding the main Calvinist tenets. Nevertheless, some ministers from Geneva tried to impose a stricter interpretation of them. Two factions so emerged within the Dutch Reformed Church. While the Genevan elements desired strict devotion to Calvinism and Presbyterian church rule, those who were less inclined to a Calvinistic view of predestination tended to prefer that the magistrates oversaw church discipline to tolerate Lutherans and Anabaptists. The clergy leaned towards the former, while the laity, including the magistrates, tended toward the latter. But a sizable portion of the clergy clung to non-Calvinistic conceptions of predestination. The States General never sought to define the Roman religion so rigidly as to exclude those who embraced conditional predestination, i.e., conditioned by faith. There was an attempt at a reconciliation between the two camps, but it failed. At the time Arminius was developing as a theologian, there was a conflict in the Reformed churches of Holland. Therefore, in the Dutch Reformed churches of Arminius's day, there was no explicit unanimity on the Calvinist teachings. Following a resounding victory over Petrus's accusations against him, Arminius then had a reasonably calm pastorate and avoided doctrinal dispute for the following 10 years. He wrote a ton of theology-related material throughout this decade. An attempt was made in 1602 to nominate Arminius to a position at the University of Leiden, but once more, there was opposition to the proposal, this time led by a Calvinist professor, Franciscus Gomarus of Leiden. Nevertheless, Arminius was named a professor of theology by the Leiden burgomasters in May 1603. Shortly thereafter, he earned his PhD in theology. The final 6 years of Arminius's life were spent in Leiden, where he battled tuberculosis while also being engulfed in a raging theological argument over predestination and the need for a national synod. In order to organize a national synod, the States General convened a conference in 1607. The amendment of the confessional documents was not adopted despite Arminius's recommendation. In response to the ongoing accusations of fraudulent teaching against him, he requested an investigation into his case by the States General. In 1608, Arminius and Gomarus finally appeared before the High Court to present their respective arguments. This was when Arminius wrote his renowned Declaration of Sentiments, where he vehemently advocated against unconditional election. Despite the States General's resistance to Gomarus, the discussion became heated. In August 1609, the States General invited Arminius and Gomarus back for a conference. Arminius, however, was unable to continue due to his illness, which had been worsening. Therefore, the conference was called off. The States General gave the two men 2 weeks to write their opinions down and submit them. Arminius never got around to finishing it because of his worsening tuberculosis, and on October 19, 1609, this godly man passed away.